Namaskar. Today we will be beginning with our next lecture on our course in Sales and Distribution Management. This is lecture 27, which is the second lecture in the sixth module of our course, and the topic we shall be covering today will be motivation. Now, motivation is again a part of Salesforce management, and the different topics that we should be covering in this particular discussion are as follows: the meaning of motivation, the process of motivation, purpose of motivating a sales force, and the various theories of motivation and their application to Salesforce management. So, let us now begin our discussion on this particular topic. Now, the term motivation has been derived from the Latin word movere, which means to move. And so, we define a motivation as an inner urge or a desire to move towards a particular goal, so that a particular need or a want can be satisfied. So, hence motivation is a goal directed activity underlying which are deep rooted and unfulfilled needs and desires, and while needs relate to something which is lacking, the goals act as means towards achieving it, and the desires suggest a positive orientation towards achieving something. So, when we talk about motivation, we say that it is an inner urge to move towards a particular goal. It is an inner urge to move in a particular direction to achieve a particular goal so that a need or a want can be satisfied. Now, we as human beings, we all need to be motivated, and motivation is something which is an absolute must for any activity to occur. Even if we feel thirsty, we have to get up and go to the the refrigerator and pull out a bottle of water so that and have the water so that our thirst can be quenched. So again, we get motivated to get up from wherever we are sitting and going to the refrigerator to fetch a glass of water for us only and only because there is a need. So hence we say that when we talk of motivation, it is an inner urge or a desire to move towards a particular goal to satisfy a need or want. Now, when applied to Salesforce management, motivation is all about stimulating salespeople towards exerting some effort towards achieving the sales objectives. Now, the sales objectives here would be, of course, could be earning sales, revenues for the company, could be earning new customers for the organization, could be retaining older customers, to be entering into good CRM practices, calling on clients with follow-up calls, calling up your channel partners or trade channel partners, and seeking customer feedback. Any and all of these could be the different sales objectives or the sales activities which salespersons must perform. And so, in the case of Salesforce management, motivation is all about stimulating the salespeople towards exerting more efforts. Now, while all salespeople have their targets, have their goals, they have the clearly laid out tasks and activities which they must perform, we always need a motivational system in place so as to be able to encourage them not only to achieve their goals but also to work harder and achieve something even better than what has been actually prescribed or predetermined for them. So, a motivation here denotes the amount of efforts that a salesperson wishes to supplement in regard to various sales activities like calling to potential accounts, preparing sales reports, exploring new segments, new markets, new customers on their own, generating more leads. So in order to for this, in order to in order to ensure that the salesperson puts in so much of efforts, it is very important that there is a system in place which takes into care the various motivational aspects, so that the employees in the organization can be kept motivated at their workplace. They not only are keen on achieving their objectives but also keen to achieve something more for the betterment of the organization. So, motivation is all about stimulating salespeople towards exerting more efforts for achieving sales objectives, and it denotes the amount of efforts that a salesperson will wish to supplement in regard to the various other activities which he has been entrusted with. Now, it is important that salespeople are kept motivated as financial performance of an organization hugely it depends on their efforts. When we talk about motivation, I just mentioned about needs, and here when we talk about needs and wants, we would like to differentiate between the two. Now, need is a state of felt deprivation, while a want is a desire for a specific satisfier. So, and these needs could either be physiological in nature or they could be psychological in nature. Physiological needs are biogenic needs; they arise out of our physiology, and they would be same for everybody, because as human beings we all have similar physiologies, and so the needs that arise from them are also similar. These relate to need for food, or the hunger need, or thirst, oxygen to breathe, sleep, rest. So these are all needs which arise from our physiology. Apart from that, we have something called psychological needs. We also call them psychogenic needs, and these are the needs which relate to some to aspects of a person's psychology. And for example, need for esteem, need for status, power. These are things which arise out of our psychology, and all of us as individuals, as human beings, we differ in the psychological needs. Now, whether it is physiological needs or whether it is psychological needs, human beings are driven towards action only and only when such needs exist. And in the case of Salesforce management, again, a salesperson who has been given the responsibility of achieving his targets would only and only be driven towards them if he has if he needs to satisfy these physiological and psychological needs. And so it is very important that organizations design such motivational plans which keep their people motivated. Now, for this it is important that the sales managers and the sales executives understand what motivates the sales force. Is it more of the physiological needs, or is it more of the psychological needs, and how should these needs be met? Again, would depend upon whether the motivational plan offers financial incentives or whether it offers non-financial incentives. So we will be talking about this in little more detail as we proceed. Now, when we talk about motivation, let us first discuss the process of motivation. As I said, the Salesforce motivation here refers to the arousal or the intensity or the direction and the persistence of efforts towards sales jobs. And both the sales jobs will be both selling activities as well as non-activities. So, Salesforce motivation here refers to arousal, intensity, direction and persistence of efforts directed towards sales jobs, both selling and non-selling activities. Now, again, Salesforce motivation relates to both monetary and non-monetary incentives, and companies must motivate their salespeople at two levels. One, at the individual level, as the sales based on the salesperson's own productivity and performance in the field, and two, the team or the group level, which would be in terms of the entire sales force being rewarded by the organization to keep them motivated. So, before we go into this, let us first briefly discuss the process of motivation. It starts with a motive, okay, as I said, and that leads to an inner urge to move towards a particular goal. Now, this inner urge would be meant towards an action or a behavior. So, the motive leads to a behavior on our part, so as to be able to reach a particular goal. Until and unless the goal is achieved, the person remains in a state of tension. A small example with respect to a general example, and something I'll also give an example related to the Salesforce and marketing scenario. For example, you enter your home in the afternoon. It's a hot summer day, and you enter the home and you're very thirsty. If somebody opens the door for you at home and wants to talk something or tell you something, you just don't want to listen to anything or hear anything, and you just want to rush to the nearest water bottle or the refrigerator, or the thermos flask which is lying there, anything there, just to pull out some water, fill it in the glass, and you have the water. Until unless you have the water, your mind is in a state of tension. If somebody wants to talk to you or interrupt you, you just would not mind telling the other person, oh, please let me first have a glass of water, and it's only then that I listen to what you want to say. So, so because that particular need creates that leads to an inner urge in you to behave in a particular manner, and this behavior relates to attempting towards getting water, a glass of cold water, which becomes your goal. And once you have this water, your need is satisfied, and your thirsty need is satisfied, and the kind of tension that you're going into, or the kind of the reaction which you show before you've had the water gets reduced, and after you have the water you feel you're in a state of rest and calm. Similarly, in the case of a sales and marketing scenario, when targets are given to a particular salesperson, and it is it is towards, suddenly a salesperson realizes that he is not being able to meet the targets, and thus there is about just a few days left, it actually makes him put in more effort with respect to both selling activities, non-selling activities, and he goes out of the way putting in behavior so as to be able to reach the target or reach the goal. Until unless the goals are achieved or the sales target is achieved, he remains in a state of tension, because he feels that if targets are not achieved, he may either be reprimanded, or he may be penalized, or he may be even asked to leave the job. So that puts him into huge amount of stress and huge amount of tension. Now here it is a fear which makes him act. Some companies must ensure that it is not a fear factor which must make people react. In fact, it should be more of a reward factor which should make people move, strive towards attaining certain goals. And again, if we continue with this example, we will see that if there is a sales target and there is a time period within which the sales target is to be achieved, and also there is an incentive linked to productivity and performance, in that case the salesperson would be hugely motivated to meet clients, to make presentations, and he'll put in all efforts to close the sale, so that he would be able to meet the targets, he would be able to meet the goal, and intertwined with the goal would be a reward system, either at the individual level, at his own based on his own productivity, or at the group level, which would be based on the team's effort, or the overall a reward system in place for the organization wide sales force, which he also would get a share of. So the motive here, as a target is set, he would be motivated to achieve that goal only and only when there are incentives attached to it, and he would put in all kinds of efforts to be able to get the sale or get the target. So the motive here will lead to a behavior on his part to act, to put in huge amount of effort, to call upon customers, to call upon prospects, to make presentations, give demonstrations, and close the sale. Also to follow up with existing customers and clients, address their demands, address their grievances if any, so that he can have good customer relations with them, and then he can also sell more to them. So in this way he will be able to reach his goal or his target, and once the period is over, or once the particular specified time period within which he is supposed to earn the sales is over, and he is able to achieve the target, he would be in a state of calm. It would reduce his tension. So when and how will this happen? As I said, it should not be something which is based on fear, but it is something which is based on a reward factor, and companies must motivate its salespeople both at the individual level, so that they end up being good performers, and individual productivity can be enhanced. It should also be at the team or the group level, where the salespeople work together in a team and share the rewards which have been stipulated by the organization. Overall, the organization must earn profits, so that there is a gain sharing and a bonus with everybody, and the entire sales force can be rewarded. So sales force motivation here can relate to both monetary and non-monetary incentives, as we will see later. Monetary being more in terms of the commissions, the incentives and other benefits, and non-monetary being in terms of recognition, promotions, titles, opportunities for growth and advancement in the career. So if companies want their salespersons to perform well and perform more than what is actually desired, it is very important that Salesforce motivation is addressed, and that would mean that the people are kept motivated to perform both their selling and non-selling activities. Now, what is the purpose behind motivating salespersons? Salespersons, we all know, are are hugely responsible for earning sales for a company, profits for a company, market share. Also, they have a big role to play in managing customer relations, also managing relationships with the channel partners or the marketing intermediaries. So they must possess the ability and potential to achieve sales and profits for the company. They must have the knowledge, skills and abilities that develop with training and experience. However, we often see that even in spite of the fact that the salespeople have the knowledge, skills and abilities with them, and which are also enhanced either during initial days in the company or subsequently through continual sales training programs as they grow older in the organization. Yet not all salespersons are effective and efficient, and what may drive salespeople towards effectiveness and efficiency is motivation. So also, while a salesperson has the necessary cases that are minimum requirements for satisfactory performance, the question that arises is satisfactory performance sufficient for an organization? So one, we have to keep in mind that the salespersons are hugely responsible to earn sales and revenues for the organization, and two, in spite of the fact that they may have the knowledge, skills and abilities to perform jobs which may be enhanced from time to time, yet we would see that not all of them perform well or are very effective and efficient, and so what drives them is motivation. And it can also be sometimes realized that even if they have those knowledge, skills and abilities, they prefer to remain average performers. And so in order to extract more from them, in order to make them more productive, in order to make them more effective and efficient, it is essential that they are motivated. Also, companies must understand that and they must understand and realize that and question themselves that is satisfactory performance okay with us, or do we need to go further, do we need to be better? And in case you want your salespeople to be better performers, more effective, more efficient, in that case you want them to be absolutely very high on performance, then it's very important that you have a Salesforce motivation plan in place. So that is the reason why Salesforce motivation becomes very important. Motivation also plays a very key role in encouraging salespersons towards achieving higher sales performance, not only once but continually, and they do so by selling more products and hence increasing the profitability as well as the market share of the organization. As we will see, the basic nature of the sales job is something which is very challenging, and salespeople absolutely require motivation from their superiors in particular, as well as the company in general, to attain and sustain pleasing performance levels. Both monetary and non-monetary incentives must be used by company to keep their sales force motivated. Now, a little more on the nature of the sales job. Now, it's while all jobs in an organization require motivational plans in place, yet the sales job is such, the nature of the sales job is such that it necessitates motivation, and special care has to be taken while designing such motivational programs for Salesforce. Now, what is it so special or so unique about the sales function that it requires a special treatment? One, sales jobs are full of ups and downs. It's not necessary that a salesperson would be able to close deals each time. He may be making presentations, he may be making answering queries or addressing objections in a very nice manner, yet it may be so that he's not able to close the sale. Sometimes targets are very challenging. We have discussed earlier that goals or targets may be difficult, but they have to be realistic. But sometimes what happens is targets are challenging and often unrealistic, and once a market reaches a saturation point or there is huge amount of competition in the market, it's very difficult to get sales without motivating the sales force in a very significant manner. So once a market reaches saturation or there's a high level of competition, motivation is the key towards achieving salesperson, towards striving them to work harder, towards encouraging salespersonnel to perform well and encouraging them to work harder. Now, salespersons many a times get have to interact with such people or such clients who are rude, unpleasant, and not so courteous. They can be sometimes very harsh also on the salesperson, and so this would bring down the morale of the sales force. Salesperson also need to travel a lot and spend considerable amount of time away from home, and such conditions also sometimes stimulate discouragement. Further, a salesperson also suffers different kinds of conflicts. One of the very important very common conflicts that he faces is the inter-role conflict, which arises from his multi-group membership. One, he is expected to satisfy the needs of the people both within the organization and outside the organization. Within the organization, he has to please his superiors, his colleagues, and people in other departments. Outside the organization, he must satisfy and please the customers. So he shares linkages with all the production operations team, order fulfillment team, with the channel partners, with customers and other company salespeople. And so the interests of all of these various stakeholders may not be congruent to each other. So, but here the salesperson's job is to please everybody and keep everybody happy. The salesperson often suffers a conflict of identification which arises out of his association with the various stakeholders, be it customers when he is with them or the company once he returns to office. So, while he is in the field, he needs to empathize with the customers, he needs to understand his customers, he has to be nice to them, and he has to identify with their problems and issues. But while he is in the organization, while he is back in the company, while he gets back to office in the evening, he has to then think more as an employee rather than as a person who should empathize with the customers. So here he has to think in line with the company objectives. He has to think in line with what his superiors are saying or what his colleagues are saying, and so he often suffers a conflict of identification where his roles change both outside the organization and within the organization. Also, the salesperson himself may be a customer, and this again creates a problem where he has to feel and understand whether he should act and empathize more with the customer, or he must act more like an employee of the organization and empathize with the interests or look into the interests of the company. Further, salesperson also face an advocacy conflict when he identifies with customers and advocates their views to the employer and to other people in the organization. He also has a monetary interest always and would like to sell as much as possible in the shortest period of time, and often at the cost of his inter-role conflict. He may realize that there is a product which is not very good, or it suffers quality issues or certain weaknesses with the product, yet he must hide this information, because if he is open about it, he may not be able to close the sale. So he may hide product limitations, and this may be something which may hurt his conscience, as he is not being very open and transparent with the customer. Also, the salespersons who work in the same territory or are with the same customer for years together may get bored and lose interest in the sales job entirely. So all of these issues are such which actually can be demotivating, and it requires the company needs to address issues of motivation so that the salespeople are kept motivated on the job. Now, the nature of the job is such which is challenging. There are a lot of conflicts which he faced with respect to inter-role conflict, identification conflict, or advocacy conflict. He also has to take into care, the interests of the various stakeholders, and he also has his own conscience, which may sometime, make him create problems for him, where he maybe have to do certain things which his conscience does not allow, because if he does not do them, he actually harms the interests of the organization, or he goes against the interests of the organization. Like, for example, I said that he may often feel that he is being dishonest by hiding details about a certain product and its weaknesses, yet he must sell the product, and so he hides this information. So in all of these cases, it is seen that the salesperson often faces dilemmas, he faces challenges, and he may ultimately get demotivated until unless there is a reward system in place which will keep him motivated. Now, a reward system again here could be individual, or could be team, or could be organization based, and the rewards here do not essentially mean financial incentives. They could also be non-financial incentives, as we will just see. it's important to understand that the reward system which is designed whether by the organization, whether financial or non-financial, is something which the employees of the organization consider to be valuable and attractive. So, we will discuss this as we go about discussing the various theories of motivation and their application to Salesforce management. Now, to keep employees motivated, it's important that they are provided with either incentives or working or good interpersonal relations or good working environments or opportunities for growth and advancement. Now, all of these are motivators, but what motivates a particular person may be very different to what motivates another, and it's very difficult to draw out generalizations until unless the sales executives understands his salespeople or his salesperson. He will not be able to identify as to what could be a motivator for a particular salesman and for the people on it, people like him on similar job positions. So, before we go into details on that, let us discuss some theories of motivation and their application to Salesforce management. So, we shall be discussing these 6 theories, which is the Maslow's need hierarchy theory, Herzberg's 2-factor theory, the theory X and Y, the McClelland's 3 needs theory, equity theory, and expectancy theory. So, let us go into these theories one by one. So, the Maslow's need hierarchy theory is one of the most popularly used theories proposed by Abraham Maslow. The theory postulates that every human being, there exists a hierarchy of needs which act as a guiding force behind motivation. And according to Maslow, human beings have 5 needs: physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization needs. Now, these needs are arranged in a hierarchy and they act as guiding force behind motivation. So, to elaborate on these needs, the physiological needs would include the basic physiological needs like hunger, thirst, shelter. Safety needs pertain to the protection from physical and emotional harm. Safety needs actually refer to security, refer to protection. Then there are social needs which indicate the need for affection, friendship, belongingness. There is esteem needs which relate to recognition, self-esteem, attention and achievement, and self-actualization which again relates to achieving what one is capable of achieving when one is at a full potential. So, these are 5 needs which Maslow arranged in a hierarchy, and he said that these needs exist in each one of us. As one of the need is satisfied, it no longer acts as a motivator, it ceases to act as a motivator, and other needs become dominant. So, a satisfied need no longer dominates. Once a particular need is satisfied, it ceases to remain a motivator and another need becomes dominant. So, in order to motivate an employee based on Maslow's need hierarchy, it's very important to understand the hierarchical order of needs, and a sales manager must know his salesperson and understand their specific needs. He must be able to assess whether for a salesperson it is the lower or higher order needs that motivate. Now, what are lower and higher order needs? The physiological needs and the safety needs have been defined as the lower order needs, and the social, esteem and self-actualization needs have been defined as the higher order needs. Now, the second theory which we shall discuss is the Herzberg 2-factor theory. Now, the Herzberg's 2-factor theory was proposed by Friedrich Herzberg, and it is also referred to as the motivation hygiene theory. According to Herzberg, there are 2 sets of factors, one which prevent dissatisfaction, the others which lead to motivation. So, he clearly demarcated a difference between something which will prevent dissatisfaction and something which will lead to satisfaction. So, he referred to them as hygiene factors and motivation factors. So, one set of factors which prevent dissatisfaction are referred to as hygiene factors, and the second which lead to motivation are referred to as motivational factors. Now, hygiene factors are those which in case they are absent would lead to dissatisfaction, and motivational factors are those which actually motivate. Hygiene factors are more extrinsic in nature and pertain to company policies, supervision, relationship with superiors and peers, work conditions, salary, status, security, etc. While the Motivational factors are more intrinsic in nature and relate to achievement, recognition, advancement, growth, responsibility, work, and the nature of the work itself. Now, when we apply this theory to Salesforce management, sales managers must ensure that the job provides such conditions which prevent job dissatisfaction. This means providing to Salesforce good working conditions, decent and fair compensation packages, reasonable and adequate supervision, sound company policies, etc. Sales manager must also ensure that the Salesforce is provided with opportunities for achievement, recognition, responsibility, growth, and the work itself is designed in such a manner that it is inspiring in nature, because these would all act as motivators. So, if we compare Maslow's need theory and Herzberg's theory, this is how this is the kind of image which we will see, where Maslow's need hierarchy is arranged in hierarchical manner, and right from physiological to self-actualization needs, and with physiological and security needs being lower order needs, and social esteem and self-actualization being higher order needs, and you have the motivational factors and the hygiene factors. So the motivational, when we still about the social needs, what we see is more of the hygiene factors, and then the esteem and the self-actualization we see act more as the motivational factors. The third theory which we shall discuss is the theory X and Y, which is proposed by Douglas McGregor, and X and Y denote a distinctive class of employees, with X type of people being those who dislike work, they need regular attention and direction and need to be coerced to perform. You need to use fear or force on them to make them work. And on the other hand, the Y type of people enjoy their work, they are self-motivated, self-directed, they have a desire to perform, and they do not need much of directives. Now, both these kinds of employees need to be motivated differently, because their very nature is very different. So, if the question is, can both these kinds of employees be motivated in similar ways? Absolutely no, they need to be motivated in different ways. So, if we relate it to the Maslow's need hierarchy theory, it can be said that as per theory X, it is the lower order needs that motivate individuals, and for theory Y, it is the higher order needs that dominate. And a salesperson must again know his salespersons, and the sales manager must again know his salespersons and must be able to assess whether for a particular salesperson it is the lower or the higher order needs that dominate, and accordingly he must design these motivational plans. The next theory is the McClelland's 3 needs theory, which was proposed by David McClelland, and according to McClelland, human needs can be of 3 kinds, and human beings are driven by these 3 kinds of needs, which is need for achievement, need for power, and need for affiliation. So, these 3 needs influence the behavior of an individual. Now, need for achievement is the need to achieve goals and excel in whatever you do and seek recognition. The need for power relates more to authority, which is the need to dominate and control the behavior of others. The need for affiliation is the need for friendship and belongingness, and to develop harmonious relationships. Now, again here, sales managers must know their salespersons and be able to assess whether the salespersons are high on need for achievement, power, or affiliation. So, salespersons who are high on need for achievement would be best performers in sales jobs. They would desire attaining sales targets and should be given difficult and challenging goals. Those who are high on need for power would act as strong leaders for Salesforce, who are Y type. They would be very strong team leaders, and salespersons who are high on need for affiliation would work best as sales team members. They would possess team spirit and would successfully work in cross-functional teams. The next is the equity theory, which was proposed by Stacey Adams, and according to Stacey Adams, people compare their job inputs and outcomes with those of others, and the degree of equity or inequity that a person perceives would actually have an impact on the performance and on their work performance and job satisfaction. So, inequity occurs when a person perceives that the ratio of his or her outcome to inputs and the ratio of another person's outcomes to inputs is unequal. So in those cases, whenever they feel that there is inequity, they would gradually get demotivated. They would gradually begin to get dissatisfied on the job, and so sales managers must understand that salespersons must perceive equity, as this would lead to a motivated sales force. Then we come to the expectancy theory, which was proposed by Vroom. Now, it proposes that motivation is a process of governing choices for behavioral activity, and according to Vroom, the strength of a tendency to act in a particular manner depends on the strength of an expectation that the act of behavior will be followed by an outcome, and the outcome is attractive to the individual. So, what he spoke of was expectancy, which is effort performance relationship, instrumentality, which is performance reward relationship, and balance. So, according to Vroom, if a person feels that if he tries he can perform, and if he feels that if he performs he will be rewarded, and the reward is something which is attractive. So, what Vroom referred to was a effort performance relationship, which was expectancy, and then the performance reward relationship, which was the instrumentality, and the reward or the reward and the personal goal relationship, which was balance. As I said a little while ago, it's very important that motivational packages are such designed which are attractive to the sales force, and that is where Vroom's theory is applicable, where it is not only important that salespeople realize that if they put in effort, they will lead to the targets, and if the targets are achieved, it would lead to a reward. It is also important that the rewards are something which are attractive and hold value to the sales force. So, sales managers can provide training so that the performance capabilities of employees can be enhanced, which means effort would lead to performance relationship. Sales managers must also assure their employees that good performance would lead to a reward, which is performance leading to an outcome, and the rewards must be such that are meaningful and attractive to the sales personnel, so which we refer to as balance. Now, coming to the conclusion, what companies must decide upon is the motivational mix. They must design their motivational programs carefully, and the tools could be both financial and non-financial. Financial being salaries, commissions, incentives, bonus, fringe benefits, sales contests, and non-financial tools could be promotions, titles, recognition, sales meetings, and sales training programs. It is important that such motivational plans and practices are adopted, which actually will not only help meet sales force interest at the individual level, but also at the team level and the organizational level to keep them motivated at their respective jobs. So, these are the references for the particular lecture, and with this we come to an end of the second lecture on the 6th module of the course. Thank you.